Welcome to another edition of Unstoppable Mindset. Wherever you may be, we hope you're having a good day and we hope that we can make it a little bit better. We have an interesting guest who has had some surprises in her life. Lisa Wilson has done a lot of work in the HR world. She's now a coach and thought leader in a variety of subjects. She has also happened to be a person who has been listed and put in chapters in several books and is now writing her own. So there you go, another author. Lisa, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Michael.
And there's nothing wrong with being another author. Authors are good people to have around.
They are. And it's easier to be an author than you realize.
Yeah, well, it is. You know, everyone has a story to tell. And the problem is we just don't get enough people thinking that they can tell the stories.
Agreed. And I think people are so interesting. They have so many interesting stories, and we kind of put them off as things. Well, I did that, so no big deal. But it is.
Yeah, nobody's going to be interested in that.
Yeah.
I remember when we started writing Thunderdog, I thought people would be interested in it. Someone said you should make it a business book, and I thought that it needed to be something of a more general nature than that. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being of a more general nature than that, and people are interested. So it's great to be able to share information.
Well, you can always write too, right? Just take the lessons from Thunderdog and make it a business book.
Well, and there is always that.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about you growing up and stuff like that.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in Northern Ontario, Canada, and I'm a very driven person. I don't know if I was when I was growing up, but when I got into university, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do to go into school. I started in psychology, and after first year, I saw a lot of my friends were in business, and I really liked what they were taking. So I switched over, and my way to hold on to the psychology, and I did hold on to the psychology. That was kind of my backup courses. So all those electives that you get to take.
Yes.
And so I kept them on as electives. And when I took my first organizational behavior course, which is the first human resources course, I realized that it was almost a repeat of first year psychology. And so that was my way to meld the two. And I came out, and that's really, when I talk about it, that's the kind of drive I had. My mom used to say to me, I don't even know where that comes from in you. I decided that when I left school, I was getting a job in HR. And that wasn't easy. People don't want you in HR if you have no experience. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. They don't want you if you have no experience. And I get it. After having been there for a while, it's really hard to step into that role. You really do need some experience. So for the first 2 years, I would take 6-month contracts. And I decided then I got my first full-time role. So I did 4 6-month contracts for 2 years, finally got a full-time role, and decided I was going to be an HR manager before I turned 30. And I was. At 28, I had been offered a job as a manager in my hometown when I was 27. But I knew I wasn't ready to take it, so I turned it down. And I was working for a really awesome company at the time and a really great manager. And I went to the manager and I said, I just turned down a management role and I don't want to have to do that again. I know I'm not ready. Can you tell me what I need to do to be ready? And so she said a couple of things. One was business writing. Oddly, they don't teach you proper business writing in university. Mm-hmm. So I went and took a course. And the other was public speaking. Now, nobody believes me anymore, but I was a terrible public speaker. I was afraid. I spoke really quietly and I ran off the stage. I did one employee meeting and my general manager had gone to her and said, Lisa can't do those anymore. So either she gets way better at it or you're not allowed to put her up there in your place anymore. So I went to Toastmasters and learned how to do that. And within the year, the same job came back up. So I was offered the job, and this time I took it. There was no interview or anything. They just called and they said, "Are you ready now?" And I said, "Yep." And I went back, and so I had my HR manager's role by the time I was 30.
That's pretty cool. So what do you like about, or what did you like about being an HR manager and working in HR?
I like lots of different things, and HR is never the same. And I remember having a woman come in to talk to, we had like an HR club at university, and I said, can you give us a day in the life? And she said, no. And that is the reality. There is no day in the life of an HR person. It's really, there's so many different things that you're dealing with on any given day that it's really hard to say, okay, I come in and I do this. Because I used to come in with a plan for the day, and then something would happen and it was all gone.
Yeah.
The whole plan was gone, and I'd be dealing with that instead for that day. So I really like the variety of it, plus having that ability to connect with people. So I got to connect with leaders and help them in their role. I got to connect with people I worked in manufacturing type environment. So I got to work with people who were working on the floor. And then, I got to be at meetings with the CEOs. So I got such a variety of everything in what I did all day and the people I worked with. And so I think that was a huge thing for me. I really enjoyed it.
What exactly does an HR person, or we'll take you, an HR manager, do? What is the job?
So this changes all the time. So I've noted now when I'm not looking for a job, but they pop up in LinkedIn and stuff to let you know. And they've changed the name to like people and culture, or engagement officers, things like that. So the role I don't think the role itself has changed from what I know, but they just changed the name in the hopes of making it sound a little bit better. My definition was this. We have, in all companies that grow like that, you have people working for you. That's the humans. And they are a resource to the company. So you need those humans there doing what they're doing. And I say the reason it's called human resources is we need to recognize that the people working for us are a resource. They are getting us to where we need to in the company, but we still need to treat them like human beings. And so HR makes sure that happens. So there's a constant balance when you're working in HR of taking care of the business and making sure the business is moving forward. Because at the end of the day, if the business isn't making money, all those people are going to lose their job anyway, eventually. So that needs to happen. But then you also have to take care of your people. You can't take care of your people so well that you don't make any money, but you can't sort of treat them so badly that you're making a ton of money, but they're not going to stay. So it was a constant balance, I say, that you're looking at. So probably the other reason I liked it is there was that constant, okay, how do we make sure the business runs, but still take care of our staff?
One of the things about society that still very much exists today, when we talk about diversity and in the workforce and so on, is that disabilities tend to be left out. We just still don't see the same level. And I specifically deal, of course, with blindness, but it goes beyond that. And I have found, and a lot of us have found, that HR people tend to be a reflection of society. How are you going to do this job? Or we just aren't convinced that you could possibly do the work. And some of us have the view that HR was supposed to be kind of a little bit more open than that, but it doesn't always work that way.
So I think that it's like anything else. Some of us are different than others. And while some are better at it, some are, terrible at it. And I think it's that whole balance of, we still have to take care of the company, but we also need to take care of our people. So, and where does that balance fit in? I heard a really great presentation about this. And the reality is, if there's like for you, you can't see, the world isn't set up for you. And so you are, for lack of a better term, smarter than the rest of us, because every day you have to make tougher decisions than we do. And you've learned to be adaptive. And so the presentation was basically that. And it was actually a person who, I believe he was hard of hearing. I don't think he was deaf. I think he was hard of hearing because he came and he spoke to us. And we were able to ask questions, but I can't remember exactly how they got the questions to him. And he ran a Tim Hortons and he talked about that he really worked really hard to make sure he hired people with disabilities. And he told us this story of a woman who was also deaf, and she was completely deaf and was working at Tim Hortons. Really smart woman, like had a really great education, but couldn't get a job anywhere for exactly the reasons you're saying, is that the HR people or the company themselves, sometimes the HR people are fighting for it, just so you know, but sometimes it's an uphill battle and we have to pick our battles. And so I can't remember what her background was, but like science-based kind of thing. She was working at Tim Hortons and she had been helping in the front, I think. And then she said, well, I'd like to be a baker. And he kind of said what you said was, okay, great. We use audible tones to tell us when everything's done. So go in the kitchen, take a look around and see how you might figure that out. And she came back within 2 minutes and she said, what's the numbers on the ovens? And he said, oh, it's a countdown timer. And she said, so the audible noises are for the lazy bakers? And he said, yep. And he moved her in because he forgot that was there. She didn't even need anything special. The numbers were there. She could see them.
There's a television show here in the United States that wasn't on last year, and I don't know whether it will return. It's called What Would You Do? Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So it's a show where they create situations, and there is an actor who comes in and plays a part, and maybe there's more than one actor, and then the idea is to see how people around them react. And in the first year of the show, 2 deaf people went to a coffee shop, and this was all created by What Would You Do and John Quinones and also the Rochester Institute for the Deaf. And so the scenario was there was a guy behind the counter, a barista who was an actor in this case. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 people who were deaf, and one was applying for a job at the coffee place. And so they went in and this person went to the counter and said, I want to apply for a job. And of course, the whole idea was to put every roadblock in her way that he could. Mm. And so she said, I want to apply for a job. But I'm not sure that you'd be a good fit here. Well, why not? Well, you can't hear. And well, this is a kitchen job, right? Well, it is. And sometimes I need to give orders and I need you to be able to hear them. Well, but you could write them down, but I don't have time to write them down. And this went on for a while, and there were some people who just ignored it and some people who paid attention. And finally, and this was kind of, I think, the interesting part of the segment, 3 people pulled the barista aside. They were HR people for a company. And what they said to him was, look, you're handling this all wrong. These people have more rights than anyone else. If it's not a fit, you just take the application, you don't argue, and you write not a good fit on the application, and then you let them go.
Oh, no.
And that happens in one way or another all too often. Mm-hmm. And of course, they it showed up. They didn't reveal those people's names. And there was another woman in the shop who really hit the roof over the whole thing. And of course, John Quinones came in and explained who he was and what was going on. And so it was addressed. But the reality is that what most people don't understand is hiring persons with disabilities ought to be, and making reasonable accommodations should be, part of the cost of doing business. And it's just as much a part of the cost of doing business as somebody paying for the electric bill so there can be lights for all of you light-dependent sighted people to be able to see in a building, or providing computer monitors, or providing that fancy coffee machine so that people can go to the lunchroom and get coffee. Providing reasonable accommodations should be just as much a part of the cost of doing business as that. But we're not there yet, and that's unfortunate.
We are, we're getting there. I know in Canada, we have rules around that. So if your building is not, I'm not coming up with the right word, but if your building doesn't have, say, a ramp or things like that, so if it's not accessible, there's the word. So if your building's not accessible and you do a bunch of renovations, you are required now to make it accessible while you're renovating. There are some buildings still that, aren't there, but we actually had I'm loving the new generation, the generation that's coming up. They're just so thoughtful. We had a school in our town build ramps for all the downtown businesses that don't have ramps, and they just built wooden ramps. They're simple wooden ramps, and so that made their buildings accessible.
It made the entrance to the building accessible. Of course,
yes, yeah.
Who knows about the doorways, and who knows about counters and other things like that, and then of course, who knows about whether other things were. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
But it's a start, right? So it
is a start.
And where I see is that it came from the next generation. It was high school kids.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm like, okay, that's good. We're coming around. I think I think there's a lot of education needed. And I think that's the piece that needs to come is there is also a requirement to accommodate. And the problem is how we get there, right? So you have to get in the door. And that's the problem, is when we can't get in the door, then the next issue comes up with once someone's there. So say someone works for us, something happens, they go blind. We're required then to make sure that their workplace is accessible. We can't just fire them. That's not a thing. In some cases, in Canada, in some cases, that does happen. It's not, they don't get fired, they get retrained. We have systems in Canada that will retrain you for certain things. If the job really, you can't do that job anymore. Because the reality, where I worked, like I said, I was working in manufacturing type places. So they were very dependent that you could see. There was moving equipment, things like that. So it wouldn't have been safe to have someone. But what happened is, say something happened and they had something come up, then we were required to accommodate them, which meant either move them around in the company. And at the last resort they would be retrained to work possibly somewhere else or possibly with us. Some people, of course,
the idea behind moving equipment and so on not being safe is also still relative. There may very well be ways to address that issue, just like there were ways for the person at Tim Hortons to be able to, and the problem is that sometimes none of us know the ways, but it doesn't mean that they're not there. And it doesn't mean that they are, but we need to be open. And I agree with you that our next generation is tending to be more open, at least while they're in high school and college. And then I guess we'll see what happens once they move beyond that. And that could be
they seem to be louder about it though, too.
Yeah.
They seem to be louder about it. They really do. They've done a lot of really good things and they seem to be louder about it. So I do hope that they hold on to that. And I think because they are changing the adult's mind, right? So how do we change a society? One of the big tricks we use is change the kids, because then, like when we wanted recycling, where was it sold as much? It was sold to the kids.
Yeah.
And then the kids came home and guilt their parents into it, right?
Until recycling, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the parents, because the kids are learning, the parents are learning.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, so it's starting. And then, but you're right. I think that imagination. So like I said, anyone who's living with a disability, they're already more creative. The reality is, because you have to be, because we build the world for the light. I love that term, the light dependent, right? The world is built for the light dependent. And we can't imagine. The problem is we can't imagine, how does it work? How does it work then? Like I'm thinking about, so when you said that, maybe there were ways. So I was starting to think about, okay, so how would I have protected someone out on the shop floor when there's, like forklifts moving around quite a bit and things like that. But we had lots of protections. So there's probably some of the jobs, maybe we needed to protect them getting to and from, because we couldn't put up barriers because it would get in the way of the forklifts, but we could protect them getting to and from, like have someone take them out to their job. But then we had so many protections. You're right. They could have done it.
But the issue is, why do we need protections? It's all about listening too. And the fact is that people do work in manufacturing environments, in forklift situations and so on. The other part about it is learning how those things work. And I know of a number of manufacturing facilities where there are people who are blind who are part of the everyday work, and forklifts drive around and don't run over people. It's all about listening too.
Yeah, that's
and it is true that most people can't imagine. Unfortunately, in the case of light dependency, reasonable accommodation has been taken to the max. I mean, the reality is 160 years ago, or whenever it was done, Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb to give you guys light in what otherwise might have been dark situations. And now everyone has lights, but it doesn't change the fact that the disability of needing to have those lights is still there. And so you deal with being able to drive forklifts because you have lights in the building and you have and lights on the forklift and so on. But that's still a reasonable accommodation in one sense for a disability. And I sometimes talk about that in a facetious way, but the reality is it is true. And we need to learn to become more inclusive in some way.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
Now,
we absolutely do.
What I was going to say earlier when you were talking about kids and change society by changing the children, it dates me, but the old joke, the problem is that the only ones who could ever run VCRs were kids. No, adults could never figure out how to do those.
That's true.
So there you go. So, maybe there are some things adults will never learn. So what did we do? We came up with different technology and we don't use VCRs anymore, but I don't know whether all the new technologies are all that much easier in some senses, but people figure them out. Yeah.
We all eventually figure it out. Yeah.
One way or another.
But yeah, I agree. I think some of it I just can't even imagine, right? We did have someone who was losing their hearing in where I was working. There's lots of really awesome tools now. I found the coolest headphones that so he couldn't wear so we all wore ear protection. So the rest of us wore ear protection so that we didn't lose our hearing. And so for him, he needed something, but as soon as we then protected his hearing, he went completely deaf. So that didn't, right? So now we're protecting him and making it worse. So we found these really neat headsets that instead of it being like something blocking inside your ear, it was something went over your head. And they had a microphone in it, and the microphone in it would take away all of the other sound. And so I went out and tried them. They unfortunately didn't end up working for him. They couldn't make the sound loud enough for him. So we figured out other things. We had some lights for him and things like that. Where he was very well protected. So it wasn't, he wasn't going to be in the way of anything, of forklifts or anything like that he might not have heard. The noise, like the whole building itself was very loud. Yeah. But I was like, there's so many things. And until you are in the situation, you have to look it up. And that's why I say the problem is getting people in the door. Because if that gentleman hadn't been losing his hearing, I would never have sent my nurse to do the research. Right?
How long ago was this?
Oh, it was, I left that company in 2008.
Okay.
So quite a few.
Yeah, there are so many advances that are coming up. There are bone conduction headphones so that it completely bypasses the ear. And that may be some of what you were talking about, but, and those have even gotten better. That fact is what a number of people have discovered is that rather than having bone conduction headphones, and in fact, I'm using them now, they're much less visible, but they actually sit right in front of your ear, and it completely goes through the bone and doesn't even go into the ear at all. But what we also know is that you can even get better sound and better bone conduction by having something that sits behind the ear, because then you're not going through so much of the bone, you're going through more of the soft tissue. And the audio from those kinds of technologies is incredible. And the reality is, in both cases, what it does is it bypasses what is usually the problem for a person who is deaf or hearing impaired. They bypass the ears and go straight into the eardrum, or past the eardrum to the central part of the nerves for hearing.
So cool. And see, it's all there. We just, like I said, unaware, and it's until we learn, right? So like I said, now I'd never had anyone who was tried to come and work there who had a disability like that. Like it wasn't a thing, because most people just, I don't know, it just didn't come up. And maybe because our whole town, it's a smaller town, wasn't as adaptable. But I don't know that that's the case. We had a physio who was blind, and he was fine. He's able to go through the town was okay for him. But I think what happens is there's more supports in larger cities, and so that we don't see it as much in the smaller places. But
we also oftentimes try to create more fixes than we need to. So
right?
for example, we don't need every traffic signal in a town to make a noise so that when the light has changed. The reality is you can listen to the traffic, and unfortunately, sometimes people rely too much on the traffic signals, and so it's beeping, so it must be safe to go. No, it doesn't mean it is safe to go. It only means it's supposed to be your turn. You still have to listen to the traffic just as well. I would have to listen to the traffic just as you would have to watch the traffic.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't think that's a thing for just people who are hard of hearing or can't see. I think that's a problem for drivers as well. We don't pay attention. You don't look for everything.
I think the time is coming when autonomous vehicles will basically take over and will take driving out of the hands of drivers, which may not be such a bad thing the way people drive today.
Yeah, it's true. We had a friend of mine was hit by a car for exactly that reason that you're saying is she was walking when the thing said walk, and someone had an opportunity to turn left, and he turned left and didn't pay attention to the fact that she was walking. He hit her. And that's exactly it. And for us, what I say is it's not lazy. It's that we're not used to it. There's not a ton of pedestrians in our downtown. We're getting a little bit more so now, but so we don't think to do it. Whereas like I go downtown Toronto and I am on high alert the whole time I'm there because there's pedestrians, there's people driving, there's so many things happening that you're on high alert. Whereas here we sort of get complacent because there isn't that high traffic and people, and
which is a good thing.
Yeah.
The thing is, in like where I live in Victorville, drivers are becoming more and more aggressive every day. If you're not moving fast enough, even if you're driving and you're not going fast enough for them, they honk at you. They're just impatient. They're aggressive, and that leads to problems. We are not what we used to call defensive drivers anymore, which is unfortunate because we are in such a hurry. We miss out on a lot of things anyway, but we also make life less safe for everyone when we do that.
Yeah. And I think, I was hopeful that kind of people having to slow down a little bit in the last couple of years because we weren't going as many places, that it might help some of that to keep people, but I don't know that it has.
Well, so how long did you stay in the HR world?
I think officially, I think it was 17 years.
Ah.
Mm-hmm.
And then what caused you to switch?
So I had a couple of really good experiences. I worked for some really good companies. And then once I took the management role, I sort of had a series of less than stellar companies to work for, we'll call it. And the last one was the absolute worst for me. And it just got to a point, I was only there 3 years. But how I put it is I was a terrible hire for them. They should never have hired me. And the reality was, I think they were desperate at the time. They had been searching for someone for a while, and probably I should have known better too. So it's not all on them. But when I was in the interview, they said things to me like we were discussing different things I'd done because I'd worked for lots of different companies by this point. And so I had some really good tips and tools and ways to organize things because I'd learned from all these different companies. And when I was in the interview, the woman kept saying, "Oh, that's great. We need someone like you with ideas. We need to change some things. We need all those ideas." And then once I got there, what they would say to me is, "Assimilate, Lisa." So, i.e., don't give us your ideas. We don't care about your ideas. Just do what you're told. And that's not me. That's not who I am. And that's not what made me great at HR. What made me great at HR was that ability to go in and go, okay, how do we fix this? and this isn't working right. Let's make it better. And they were just such a large organization that wasn't what they were looking for. And it really took its toll on me. Initially when I left, I was not a leadership coach. I walked away from HR completely. I wanted nothing to do with businesses. I was just going to life coach, just life coaching, which is not my passion. And it took me quite a while to come back from that. It took about 3 years. And then thankfully, I was paid really well. So thankfully they did a reorganization. And in that reorg, my position was let go, which I have never been more grateful for anything. It's not a normal reaction to a layoff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what does a life coach do?
So, at the
how's
end
that how's that for an open-ended question?
Yeah. So the reality is most of the time coaches will have a niche that they go for, like they want to work with people who are struggling with a particular thing. And it usually comes from our life, right? So something in our life that we've overcome, and we help others walk through the same thing so that they don't have to necessarily walk through it alone. Many of the people who are in coaching are because they found a coach that helped them through something. And so now they're doing the same. And really, that's where mine came from as well. One of the jobs I was working at, I was getting really frustrated, and I met a coach, and I ended up going and getting some coaching and then taking her coaching course. So that's where this came from. And I'd always had the goal. So when I left that job, I always knew I was going to start a coaching company. My intention was always to be a leadership coach, to be working more with CEOs. And that was always my goal. But after having been there for 3 years, it just rocked my confidence so much that I stepped completely away from anything to do with HR.
Mm-hmm. And then you eventually went back to what your passion was, which was leadership coaching.
Exactly. I did. And I do some HR consulting as well. But what I say, I focus more on the culture, and I have to be careful how I say that, because when people hear that, they think I help people working with different cultures come together.
Right.
But that's not the idea.
It's the company culture.
Yeah, every company has its own culture. And if you're not paying attention to what that is, the culture creates itself, and then it becomes a really difficult thing to change.
Well, along the way, and we haven't really referred to it, but you had an unexpected life change.
I did,
and so why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that will make for interesting, thought-provoking discussions here.
Yes. So just after coming out of that job, so I don't know if this is part of the reason, is the stress at that job was quite high, and I often had odd illnesses while I was working there. So just different things would come up. I'm not the type of person that gets like a flu and just lies down. I might get like a skin rash or something that actually comes from a virus, because my body is tired and I'm so stressed. So I had lots of those little things, and I got to a point, a doctor had said to me, look, if you can't take, like, can you take a vacation? And I said, yes, I can. Actually, I was looking at vacations as I was sitting waiting to come in here. And he said, okay. He said, because if you can't, I'm putting you off on sick leave. And so I did. I went away. But very shortly after working there, they discovered a lump on my thyroid, and they'd been watching it. Now, I need to clarify this right at the beginning, is that women typically have lumps on our thyroid. If you're into the spiritual side, it's a heart chakra, or it's your throat chakra. And so, using our voices is part of what comes from this, but that's the sort of spiritual side of it. But women typically have them. They can be cancerous, they can be non-cancerous. They're just lumps on our thyroid. They show up. And they are not harmful. They grow really, really slowly. So even if they are cancerous, it takes them a really long time to grow. So I did have one, they were watching. And 6 months after I left this place, they thought that lump had grown for some reason from 2.4 centimeters to 4.2 centimeters in 6 months. And that's unheard of. They didn't understand why that was happening. That didn't make any sense. For it to grow that quickly was ridiculous. So they said to me, look, we think we need to take it out. It's growing too fast. It's very bizarre. Best thing to do is just take it out. It won't harm you. You'll be fine. you'll come back to full, you'll be fine. The other half will pick up and it'll do what it needs to do and your body will be fine. So I said, okay, you can put me on the list. And I had a panic attack sometime shortly after that. And it was one of those moments where there was this voice in my head that said, do not have this surgery. Don't have this surgery. And I thought, oh, and I pushed it away. I went, no, Lisa, don't be ridiculous. You don't he's a great doctor and he is a great doctor. The man that took care of me is a wonderful doctor. So I have nothing bad to say about him. I just pushed it away, but I think I told my mom. And so we went and got a second opinion. And I went to the second opinion. The second time I didn't do what I needed to do was I had a disc with all of my scans on it. And I didn't give it to the second opinion doctor. He just felt my throat. He felt the lump and he said, look, there's a lump there. Don't be afraid. It's not going to be a big deal. Go get the surgery. And I had that disc and I didn't give it to him. I did have the surgery. They took out half my thyroid. The doctor is wonderful. He learns. So he'd made a mistake once where he got in and found out that a woman it was cancerous because he can tell by looking, he's done so many, and he needed to take the whole thyroid out. So he made me sign before he went into the surgery that if he finds cancer on the other side, that he can take the whole thing out. So that's why I say I have just really high thoughts of this doctor. So we did. It was fine though. I didn't need to take the other one out. When he took it out, he said, it's fine. The lump wasn't cancerous. You're okay. You'll heal. It'll be fine. I didn't though. For years after, I went from the person who did P90X and CrossFit and mountain biking and kayaking, and I could, spend a whole day running or doing whatever. I'd actually done a half marathon as well. Not my favorite thing, but I went from that person to a person who could do 10 minutes of exercise. And if I do any more, I burn myself out. And worse than that was when the doctor, so right after the surgery, he said, you're good to go. It wasn't cancerous. You'll be okay. And that was the other piece I forgot to mention is they don't even if it's cancerous, they don't even look at your thyroid until it's at least 4 centimeters. And then they start to watch more closely. So anything under that, they just leave because it's healthier for you to keep it there than it is to have it taken out. So when I went back for the follow-up after the surgery, he said to me, he sat and he had his hands over his face. So he was kind of like all of his fingers were splayed at the top of his forehead. And he had his hands his knees, elbows on his knees, and was holding himself up. And I thought, now, why does he look like that? Like he looked distressed. I thought, okay, why does he look like that? He told me it wasn't cancerous. Why does he look like that? And the reason he looked like that is because it was a mistake. That lump had not grown. We think it was a typo. So they took out half my thyroid on a typo. And it was obviously very shocking and upsetting because I was also supposed to come back to full energy and I never did. So for quite some time, I spoke to someone else who had the full thing taken out. And she said, Lisa, it'll take you about a year. So don't push it for the first year. Just accept that you're going to be a little less energy, but after a year, but I never came back. So now I walk my dog for 20 minutes in the morning, which I never considered walking exercise before now, but that was just something you did to get from place A to place B. But now it's, that's like I can walk the dog and then do 10 minutes of some other form of exercise. That includes like yoga or Pilates or something that's a little bit what I would refer to as easier when you're doing P90X and CrossFit. I'm used to doing like pull-ups and really big things like that. So doing Pilates and stuff was fairly easy for me, or used to be. Now it just does the same thing. It burns me right out. Initially I could get through the workouts, but then I would spend the next 2 days on the couch because my adrenals would be so burnt.
There were not medications that you could take to kind of offset some of the lack of what the thyroid produces?
Yes. So there is something called Synthroid. We tried it twice. So they put me on what they would normally start someone on, which I think is like 0.5 can't remember what the measurement is, but they put me on whatever it was, 0.5. And what happened is it made me really hyper. And I realized about a month in, I was walking the dog and I was like, I want to run. Like my heart wanted me to run. And I started to run up the road. And then I was like, this isn't a good idea. I haven't run in a year. I need to be careful. I'm going to hurt my muscles. Like this isn't a good idea, right? You shouldn't just start from a sprint. That's not a good choice for your body. And then I became really agitated. So I wasn't a very nice person. I had a friend over one day and she said something to me and I snapped at her, and that's totally not my personality. And I thought, okay, that's bizarre. And so I went off of it. I told him what had happened and I went off of it. So then we left it for a month or so and I tried it again, but now at a lower dose. So now at a 0.25, and all that happened is it took me 2 months to get there. So my doctor didn't really want to put me on it. He said that my thyroid numbers are fine. So according to Western medicine, I am completely healthy. And it took me a really long time. Even I switched doctors after a while, and it took me a long time to convince the next doctor that there was a problem and get her to start sending me to different specialists to try and figure out what was going on. It took like 2 or 3 years actually to get her to pay attention. She just assumed, which is a thing in medical worlds, that if a woman is tired, she's depressed. And so that was the first thing she said to me. Are you depressed? And I said, well, no. And I gave her the benefit of the doubt because she was a new doctor. I said, look, okay, maybe I am depressed. What would we do? I won't go on medication right away. That's not something I want to do. If I were depressed, what would we do? And she said, well, cognitive behavioral therapy. I said, okay, is that me sitting on the couch on those days that I can't move saying, it's okay, your life's good, you're just tired? And I said, repeating that to myself, she goes, oh, yeah, that's exactly what that is. And I said, okay, so I'm a life coach. So I know those tips. And she was like, oh, okay. But even that, she didn't move on. She didn't send me to she didn't look it up. She didn't send me to anything. But then what started to happen is I have the propensity for high cholesterol and diabetes, both runs in my family. And I know this, I've known it for years. I don't believe that it's something that's going to happen to you. You can fight it with how you live your life. So I'd known this and I'd always fought it with my diet and exercise, but because the exercise was gone, I wasn't able to, I was starting to have high A1C or I can't remember what it is, but anyway, the blood sugar basically was my blood sugar.
A1C.
A1C, yeah. So my blood sugar was going up and the cholesterol numbers were starting to go up. And it was when she came to me with the cholesterol numbers, she said, you're just at the point where you need medication. Will you take medication? And I said, absolutely not. She said, okay. And I said, look, I've been telling you for years, I can't exercise. I can't do more than 10 minutes or I burn out. My cholesterol is going up because I can't exercise. And she was like, okay. And even that didn't get to her because I was annoyed with her. So then the next time I went in, I said to her, look, I'm going to give you an example of what's going on in my life. My grandmother at the time had dementia and lived close to me. My parents are about an hour away. She fell and broke her hip and was in the hospital. So my parents called and said, can you go to the hospital? I said, absolutely. So I went straight to the hospital. My dad got in the car. He met with me about 2 hours later. So my 70-some-year-old father, and I was in my early 40s, drove the hour. We both stayed in the hospital till midnight. At that time, they decided to keep my grandmother. So we both came home. I made him up a bed. We got to bed about 1 a.m. He got up the next morning at 7. I got up with him, made sure he had breakfast, did what he needed, and he went back to the hospital to be with my grandmother. I had work that day. But I thankfully didn't have any clients till the afternoon because he got up, he went to take care of my grandmother, got her settled, and then drove home. I, on the other hand, couldn't handle the day and went back to bed. And I said, when my 75-year-old father can handle less sleep than I can, there's a problem. And that was when she finally went, oh, and she heard me. But it took years. It was awful.
And then what happened?
So she did start sending me to different specialists, but still, according to Western medicine, I am completely healthy. There are no numbers that are off. There are no, as far as they're concerned, I've seen several different specialists. I don't have any thyroid illnesses. So they've checked different things. They've checked for fibromyalgia. They've checked for all of these different things. And I don't meet any of them. So as according to Western medicine, I am completely healthy. So what I started to do was go off of Western medicine, and I've been seeing naturopaths. Actually, the first big step for me was I eventually did get to a point where I actually was starting to get depressed. Depression for me doesn't look like what people pictured in depression, which is like you're sitting in a bed and you can't move and that kind of things. That's not what it looks like for me. For me, depression looks like overwhelm, and I get angry faster. So I have very little patience, and I'm still getting up and doing what I need to do because I'm so action oriented and so driven that I'm still getting up and doing what I need to do, but I'm not a very kind person in that. I'm just grumpy and overwhelmed and tired. And I got to a point where when I recognized it was the thought went through my head that I just wanted to die at this point. I'm done fighting this. I can't get the help I need. And my mom told me about a woman that some friends of ours had been working with, and she's what they call a medical intuitive. And so you just go on a call with her and she sort of reads what's going on with you. And so she gave me a couple of things. One was that my body was full of candida. We all have candida, but if you get an overgrowth, you'll get pains in your muscles and different things. So that was the first one. So she suggested a cleanse to clean that up, and then a big diet change. And so that was my first step. And then after doing the cleanse, I just felt so much better. I literally had pain all over my body all the time. And I thought it was because I couldn't do exercise anymore, or I couldn't stretch and couldn't do that stuff. But it was this overgrowth of candida.
So go ahead. So what did you do?
So that was the first step, was really a big change in my diet. I also started then seeing naturopaths who helped me through a few other things. So how the naturopaths, there's no really tests for this, but what they describe is that my adrenals burn out really quickly. So I use adrenaline. When I was tired, my body was using adrenaline to push me forward, and then my adrenaline burns out and I've got no natural energy to keep going. We don't normally use our adrenaline to keep going, but that's what I was doing every day, just to be able to move through the day. And so when I was doing that heavy exercising, that's what was happening. Is my body would shoot a whole pile of adrenaline into my system, and then it had nothing left for 2 days. So I've learned that, and I've sort of accepted now that I won't ever be able to do the P90X or CrossFit or any of those things anymore. I do my little 10-minute workouts when I have the energy for it. If I don't have the energy for it, I walk the dog and I stop. And that's the end of the exercise. I've just sort of had to accept a new way. And then I have to be prepared if I'm doing anything. So for example, it's summer now, I like to go kayaking. So I'll go kayaking for maybe a half hour, but then I have to recognize that then the following day I shouldn't have anything big planned.
Or get a kayak with a motor.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not really the same, but yes. Yeah.
Just an alternative,
Yeah. True. Yeah.
Or just save money and take a big cruise.
Yes, that too. But we do need some exercise. Regardless, I need some kind of exercise.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But are you able to do things for any longer period of time? Are there things from Eastern medicine, other kinds of alternatives that help maybe bring back some of that stamina, or nothing that you've discovered yet?
So the one thing that did get better is when I do the cleanse, and then I eat clean for a long time. And so clean, I want to just be clear that clean looks different for everyone. For me, it means something savory instead of sweet for breakfast. And it doesn't matter if I'm using like non-sugary breakfasts, like even just an apple. If I have too much sugar in the morning, I'll crave it all day, even a carb. So if I pretty close to keto, I say close, but some of the things I don't like in keto are how much fat in that is in there. So I'm a meat and veg person now. Mm-hmm. Even breakfast is I'll fry up a bunch of vegetables and whatever meat we've eaten that night kind of thing, or the night before, whatever's available, or just throw some ground beef in it if we don't have anything reasonable. So that's helpful for me and then staying off sugar and carbs. My body can handle them, but it will send me again into a slump. So really learning what to eat.
Better to stay away from it. So
Yeah.
your life has changed significantly. How long ago was the surgery?
So in 2014, it was literally the year I got laid off and was trying to start my business. Not the best time to have no energy. Maybe the worst possible time to have no energy. So 2014, it's almost been 10 years. It's been a long 10 years. And I'm recognizing recently how much I've changed in it, because when it was first happening, I was fighting it, right? I just kept trying. I was like, nope, I can build back up to this exercise. So I would do 10 minutes and the next week I would do 20. And then I would, try and build up, and then I would fall apart again. So no, it never worked. And that was frustrating for me. For a very driven person who is very action oriented, it was really, really frustrating. So my mental health wasn't good, and the state of my mind wasn't good, I'll say. So there was I was like literally in a constant battle with my own body. And how I say I've come around now is that I haven't been as careful recently. We were doing some remodeling in the house, so we weren't planning meals as well and things. And just, life took over. And so I started eating things that I probably shouldn't be eating, but they were quick and they were easy. So I started to see the problems come around again. And there were so many, like, it would take me hours to tell you all the things, but some of the things were like pains in my body for no reason. I had trouble sleeping. I had a really hard time sleeping. And on those nights, and it would be that my adrenaline kicked in at the wrong time. So I'd be tired all afternoon. And then when it was time to go to bed at 9, 10 o'clock, the adrenaline would kick back in. So then I'd be wide awake. And when in those moments, I was angry because I was stressing about the following day. How am I going to run a business if I can't even get to sleep at night? And, I would stress through it. And over the last little while, where I watched some of this come back, where I'm lying in bed and I can't sleep, it's been maybe the last 2 or 3 years where that'll happen again sometimes when I'm just, life happens and I'm just not paying attention as well, or I go somewhere that I don't have as much control over food. You're eating whatever's available to you. And I've discovered now that instead of, freaking out or getting upset or stressing about what's going to happen the next day, is my mind just goes, okay, go read a book. And I'll get up and I'll go read a book. I've now bought an e-reader, so I don't actually have to get out of bed and turn on a light. I can just use the e-reader, so I'm not waking up my boyfriend. But I just read the book until I actually want to sleep, and then I sleep when I sleep. And I never book my days so full that I can't have a nap in the middle of the day or have a rest somewhere in the middle of the day. So I just have allowed that to happen. And then if I need a nap, I take a nap.
So what are you doing now for work?
So I work for myself. I do the life coaching, or not the life coaching, the leadership coaching, and I work from home. So that's why I say I never book my days so much that I have like one thing after another. There's always at least a half an hour between things. So worst case, I can have a 10-minute nap. And that helps. It's partly planning in my life, but it's also just where my mindset has gone. So that even if I knew I had that time the following day, previously, I was so angry that my body wasn't doing what it was supposed to do that I couldn't get through it. And now I just go, oh, well, can't sleep. Might as well read my book.
So you progressed a lot. You certainly could have become very bitter over all this that have happened to you. And you don't sound like you're a very bitter person.
No, I'm not. I think there have been times. I mean, I work lots with, like you said, the Eastern medicine and things. So I've done, can't think of what it's called, the little needles. They're not, the name's not coming.
Acupuncture.
Yeah, I've done acupuncture, and I do a lot of meditating, and I do lots of things like that. And I spoke to a woman one time who does a modality, we'll call them, where she works through things that are going on in your body. And basically our bodies hold on because we're not very good at dealing with our emotions, our bodies will hold emotions. And so her thing was, it was very an interesting process. It was just on Zoom, and she worked through with me. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know my story. She said around this time, and she gave me the age that I had the surgery. She said, around this age in your life, you have horror stuck in your body. I was like, horror? She said, yeah. And I was like, that makes sense. I mean, someone telling you they took out a piece of your body on a typo, that's horrifying. It really is. And so I've done lots of work with those kind of things as well. But I also hold a belief that really we can work through anything that the world hands us, right? Like we can work it through, we can figure it out. But the grief that comes with that in some cases is worse than what we realize. So the grief for me was, it took me that long to grieve who I used to be and come into acceptance of, okay, I'm not the P90X person anymore. That's not who I am. But letting go of, like, it was a huge part of my personality. I'm strong. I'm strong. I'm strong in a lot of ways, and I'm strong physically. It was such an important part of how I defined myself, that that time when I was angry and frustrated and not, angry with the fact that my body wouldn't do what it was doing, that's grief. That was grief. I wasn't moving through the grief.
And now you have.
Yeah, I've come to accept it. It's still, there are moments when it frustrates me, or I get angry with myself because I haven't paid close enough attention, and I've gone back to the carbs and the things that don't make me feel good. But they're more fleeting moments now than the overarching, kind of life view all the time.
And what do you do as a leadership coach? So now you're doing that as work, and you obviously get hired by companies and teams and people and so on.
I do. So the premise that I started with this is, and strangely, I'd hoped it would have gotten better now, and I think it has in some companies, but not all. What we do is, in a company, we take the best whatever. So if it's counselors, we take the best counselor and we make them the executive director. If it's, mechanics, we take the best mechanic and we make them the lead hand, and then the supervisor, and then the manager. So whatever the role is, we just take the best of that and we put them into the leadership role. And that's not really the best way to choose it. Just because they're really good at the role does not mean they'll be able to come up with the skills to be a leader. The skills to be a leader are very different. And so the reason I do what I do is that while some companies are good at sending you on training, what happens when you go on training, and I have tons of examples of this. There's behind me, I have just binders and binders. And that's like the culled version of all the training I've done. But what a company will do is they'll say, okay, we're going to send you to leadership training, but that leadership training is 4 days on one aspect of leadership. And so you go away for 4 days, and then you come back and your email is full and everything is full, and you don't have time to integrate the learning. So it's there, but you come back and you put the binder up on the shelf and see you later.
Yep.
So I have a course that I created that goes over, I generally do it over 8 weeks so that people have the time to integrate it. So we meet for an hour a week, and that's it. I teach a lesson, they go practice it, and then we coach on it. And then when I'm working with leaders, it's more about, okay, what is it that you need right now? We'll work through what that is. And then you can go and basically practice it, and we'll work through. Because like I said, we just throw leaders into the role, and they might get the training eventually, but it's slowly but surely, and they get it, and the binder goes straight up on the shelf because they don't have time to integrate it.
And
so
sometimes we're lucky, and the people we throw into those roles can do it because they're very intelligent people, but all too often they can't because they don't have the training, and it's not really their style.
And it is our goal. And I recognize this too, because I was there in the HR role, is we think, okay, we're going to put that person in, but it's okay. It's good. They've got Lisa. She's in the HR manager's role. She can check in on them. But then life hits the fan, and I don't have time as the HR manager to go and support that person, and nor does their manager, right? Like, they want, the heart is there to do it. They can't.
Which is why what you do is so important today.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can step in from the outside. I'm that person that's there. I'm not the HR manager who's trying to balance everything else that's going on in the company and coach this person. I come in from the outside and work with the leader. And hopefully, like, the goal is that we then fast track that, right? So instead of going to 6 or 7 training courses, though I still say go to the training courses and get them more in depth, but it's now, okay, what are you dealing with today and how are we handling that? And then working on giving them the foundations that they need so that when the next problem comes up, they're ready to handle that one too, or they at least know where to pull to make the decision.
If people want to learn more about you and reach out to you, how can they do that?
Probably best way is my website. It's LMW, so just my initials, Lisa May Wilson, coaching.ca.
So lmwcoaching.ca.
Yep.
We haven't even had a chance to talk about the fact that you're in 3 books and you're writing your own book now.
Yes, I am. Yeah. So the course I just briefly mentioned, that where I take people through 8 weeks, I was wanting to write a book, but I have a much grander idea for a book. And I was speaking to a publisher, and she said, don't start with the big book. She said, start with something you know well. And so what I've done is I'm going to write a book based on the course that I offer. So I'm taking some of the lessons and that I've learned, as well as my clients have learned through doing the course, and putting the teachings in the book, as well as some of the lessons that they learned.
Good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Start with what you know, and you'll find that you probably know a lot more than you thought, and you can get a book out of it.
Yeah. And when she had a little weekend thing where she helped us get it all mapped out, and I was like, well, it's mapped out because of the course, and we've sectioned it off, and it's quite exciting, actually. It was not something I ever thought I'd be, and I'm pretty sure that my high school English teacher is rolling over in his grave. The kid I always had so many issues when I wrote an essay. The nice thing, though, is somebody else corrects that for me.
Well, there you go. It's good to have an editor.
Yes, exactly.
It has been a joy to have you on Unstoppable Mindset, and we want to keep up as you're working on the book, and maybe do another session and talk more about leadership coaching and so on. But again, people can reach out to you at lmwcoaching.ca, and I hope they will. I think that there's a lot that you have to offer. And I think that'll be an interesting part of the book as you go forward as well.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much for this. This was really a lot of fun.
This has been fun.
So many topics. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what makes this such a fun thing to do, is you never know where you're going to go and where it's going to lead.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I hope people enjoyed this and that you will reach out to me as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. That's michaelhi@accessibe.com. Or you can go to our podcast page, which is michaelhingson.com/podcast. Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson. So I hope that you will give us a 5-star rating, that you found this insightful and interesting. And that's the best that we can ever ask for on something that we do here on Unstoppable Mindset. So hope you're having a good day, as I said at the beginning, and that this made your day a little bit better. And Lisa, once again, thank you very much for being here with us today.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.